Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, in the heart of New York's bustling airport, Alexander Sterling, a millionaire CEO known for his influence, walked proudly with his mistress, Alana Blake, believing nothing could touch his carefully built image. But fate had other plans. Standing at the arrival gate was Elena Carter, his estranged wife, glowing in a white dress, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. With a calm smile and her phone raised, Alina was ready to reveal the truth he had tried to bury. In that single moment, Adrian's world and reputation teetered on the edge of collapse. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. The night began like any other glamorous evening in the city, with music floating through the air, chandeliers sparkling overhead, and people dressed in their finest attire. But beneath the glittering surface, a storm was quietly forming. One that would change everything. Victoria walked into the grand hall with a grace that made heads turn. Though she carried more than just elegance on her shoulders, she carried pain, the kind of pain that comes when the person you trust the most betrays you. Her eyes, though calm, hid a sea of emotions as she scanned the room. And then, like a cruel twist of fate, she saw it. Alexander Sterling, her husband, the man who had promised her forever, stood far too close to another woman. It wasn't just the way he leaned toward Alana, his mistress, it was the look in his eyes, the smile he reserved for moments of intimacy, the subtle touch of his hand against her back. To anyone else it might have seemed harmless, but to Victoria, it was proof of the whispers she had heard, the late-night absences, a sudden change in his affection. For a long second, she couldn't breathe. The sight cut through her like a sharp blade, confirming what her heart already knew. Yet she did not cry, nor did she allow herself to break. Instead, a strange calm washed over her, her calm that came not from peace, but from resolve. She turned away before Alexander could see her standing there. Each step she took felt heavy, but her chin remained high, her composure unshaken. If he thought his betrayal would leave her weak, he was mistaken. Victoria was not just a wife. She was a woman who still had her dignity, her strength, and most importantly, her voice. As the days passed, whispers of Alexander's affair spread through the city's elite like wildfire. Most women in her place would have hidden away, but not Victoria. She made a decision: if Alexander could humiliate her in the shadows, she would bring the truth into the light. And the perfect moment came sooner than expected. But a grand charity gala, filled with press, cameras, and the most powerful figures in society, Victoria arrived in stunning fashion. Dressed in a gown that shimmered under the lights, her presence silenced the room. Everyone expected her to smile politely and play the role of the devoted wife. But Victoria had other plans. When the moment arrived, she stepped onto the stage, with confidence, the microphone trembling only slightly in her hand. Her voice, though calm, carried through the room like thunder. She spoke not with anger, but with heartbreaking honesty about love, betrayal, and the cruelty of being deceived by the man she trusted most. Gasps filled the hall as she revealed the truth that Alexander thought would stay hidden forever. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled furiously. The crowd shifted in shock, and Alexander, standing at the edge of the room, felt his world crumble as the eyes of everyone turned on him. But Victoria wasn't finished. She didn't just expose him, she reclaimed herself. In that moment, she was no longer the silent, humiliated wife. She was a woman who had faced betrayal head-on and found the courage to speak her truth in front of the world. And while Alexander's empire would take months to feel the true weight of the scandal, Victoria knew she had already won. For the first time in years, she felt free, not because she had destroyed him, but because she had chosen herself. Their affair had begun that night, a whirlwind of stolen weekends in Paris, clandestine meetings in Dubai, and whispered promises. In the back of chauffeured cars, Evelyn was everything Victoria was not. Where Victoria was soft, Evelyn was sharp. Where Victoria was old money and quiet grace, Evelyn was a self-made woman who had clawed her way up from obscurity and was unapologetic about her desires. She was a challenge, an intoxicating escape from the predictable, boring world. With his wife, the pregnancy had only amplified this feeling. Impending fatherhood felt less like a joy and more like the closing of a chapter, a final, irrevocable step into our life of duty and responsibility. Evelyn was his last taste of freedom, his rebellion against the gilded cage he had so carefully constructed for himself. A sleek black Mercedes S-Class awaited him on the tarmac. As he slid into the luxurious leather interior, his phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn, Suite 702. Don't keep me waiting. Hesmold. The game had begun. Meanwhile, a few hundred yards away in an unmarked rental car parked with a clear view of the private terminal, two men sat in. They were part of Robert Mills' team, a pair of ex-Special Forces soldiers who are now highly paid operatives in the world of corporate espionage and private investigation. They were patient, methodical, and completely invisible. A long-range telephoto lens with a state-of-the-art image stabilizer rested on the dashboard, its lens aimed at the Mercedes. Every movement, every detail was being captured. The lead operative, a stoic Englishman named Thomas, spoke into a small encrypted communication device. Target has landed. He's in a Black's class plate mat. We are in motion, tracking his movements, live streaming to the secure server now. Thousands of miles away in her dimly lit home office overlooking St. James's Park, Victoria watched the live feed on a large definition monitor. She saw her husband's familiar, confident stride as Ash walked toward the waiting car. She saw the slight smile on his face as he looked at his phone. A wave of nausea unrelated to her pregnancy washed over her. It was one thing to suspect, to know in your heart of hearts that you were being betrayed. It was quite another to watch it unfold in real time, in crystal clear, high definition. Her hand trembled as she picked up a glass of water. She had to stay strong. This was not a time for tears or weakness. It was a time for cold, calculated precision. She had a plan, a malicious attack that would not only expose Alexander, but also protect her and their unborn son. Phase 1 was already in motion. Robert Mills's team would go through the evidence, the irrefutable proof of the affair. Phase 2 involved Claire Vickers. Victoria had given her the exclusive, the promise of a story that would shake the foundations of London society, but she had given her strict instructions. The story was not to be released until Victoria gave the signal. The timing had to be perfect. Phase 3 was the most complex and the most dangerous. It involved Thorn Global. Victoria, for all her socialite exterior, had a sharp mind for business, a trait she had inherited from her father. She had sat on the boards of several of her family's charitable foundations and had a better grasp of corporate governance than Alexander gave her credit for. For the past week, ever since she discovered the messages on his phone, she had been secretly consulting with a team of forensic accountants and corporate attorneys. A team so discreet they only communicated through encrypted channels and were paid in untraceable cryptocurrency. She had instructed them to take a deep dive into Thorn Global's financials, looking specifically for any anomalies, any unusual transactions, or shell companies that might be tied to Alexander's personal activities. She had a hunch, an intuition that his recklessness in his personal life might extend to his professional life. If she could find evidence of financial wrongdoing, she would have leveraged that one far beyond mere infidelity. It would be the difference between a messy public divorce and a carefully orchestrated corporate takeover. Back in Monaco, Alexander's Mercedes pulled up to the grand entrance of the Fairmont Monte Carlo, a bastion of old-world luxury on the Mediterranean Sea. He was met by the hotel manager, a man who knew him well and was the soul of discretion. "Welcome back, Mr. Thorne. Everything is prepared as you requested." "Thank you, Jean-Luc," Alexander said, sliding a €100 note into the manager's hand. "You know how I value your attention to detail." He bypassed the lobby, taking a private elevator directly to the 7th floor. He walked down the silent carpeted hallway to Suite 702, the Royal Swat, a spacious apartment with panoramic views of the sea and the garden. He opened the door and there was Evelyn stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of champagne in her hand. Wearing a silk robe that hugged her slender figure, she turned with a slow, predatory smile on her face. "You're late," she purred, her Russian accent thick and seductive. "I had to make a stop," Alexander said, his voice low. He walked toward her, his eyes devouring her. He had brought her a small velvet box from Graf, a jeweler known for its outrageously expensive and rare diamonds. Inside was a necklace, a cascade of canary yellow diamonds that must have cost a small fortune. Evelyn's eyes widened at the sight of it. "From me, you shouldn't have." But her hands were already reaching for it, her fingers tracing the cold, hard facets of the stones. From a building across the street, another of Mill's operatives, a woman with the steady hands of a surgeon, captured the entire scene through the lens of a powerful telescopic camera. The gift, the embrace, the passionate kiss that followed. Every frame was a nail in the coffin of Alexander Thorne's marriage. Victoria watched it all on her screen, her face a mask of stone. The pain was a physical thing, a sharp, twisting ache in her chest. But underneath the pain, a cold, Hard anger began to crystallize. She saw the diamond necklace, a trinket bought with the money that was supposed to build a future for her son. She saw the way he looked at Evelyn, a look of raw hunger he hadn't given her in years. She picked up her phone. It was time to set phase 2 in motion. She dialed Claire because Claire, her voice was devoid of emotion. I have an update for you, Ananam. Evelyn Stone, head of art acquisitions for the Antonov Group. They're at the Fairmont in Monaco, Suite 702. And he just gave her a very, very expensive necklace. He could almost hear the salacious smile in Claire's voice. This is gold, Victoria, pure gold. When can I release it? Soon, Victoria said, but not yet. I want to let him enjoy his little getaway a bit longer. I want him to feel safe and secure. And then, when he least expects it, going to burn his world to the ground. She hung up the phone and turned her attention back to the live feed from Monaco now showed Alexander and Evelyn, champagne glasses in hand, laughing on the balcony of their suite. The city lights glittered behind them like 1,000 judging eyes. They looked like a king and queen surveying their domain, but they were unaware that their kingdom was built on a foundation of lies, a foundation that was about to crumble. And Victoria, the woman they had so carelessly dismissed as the bird in the gilded cage, was holding the detonator. What would you have done if you were Victoria's friend? Would you have tried to talk her out of revenge, or would you have supported her all the way? Let yous know what you think in the comments. Checkmate. For the next 24 hours, Victoria became a ghost in her own house, a silent observer of a life that was no longer hers. She moved through the opulent rooms of the penthouse like a wraith, her phone and tablet her only companions. The live feeds from Robert Mill's team in Monaco were a constant, brutal stream of her husband's betrayal. She watched him and Evelyn have dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, their heads bowed in intimate conversation. She watched them stroll hand in hand along the Mediterranean shore, their silhouettes sharp against the set. She watched them return to the hotel, their arms intertwined, disappearing into the gilded cage of their suite. Each image was a new wound, a new layer of pain, but with the pain came a chilling clarity. The hurt was still there, a heavy, suffocating blanket, but it was now interwoven with an ironclad resolve. She was no longer just a heartbroken wife. She was a woman on a mission, a general gathering her forces for a war she had no intention of. Her days were a whirlwind of encrypted calls and secure video conferences with her legal and financial teams. The forensic accountants, a team of brilliant but socially awkward geniuses who operated out of an unmarked office in Zurich, had been working round the clock. They were sifting through Thorn Global's labyrinthine financial records, following the digital breadcrumbs that Alexander's arrogance had surely left behind. The breakthrough came on the second day of Alexander's trip. Victoria was on a conference call with the head of the accounting team, a man who went only by the name Orion. We found something, Mrs. Thorne, Orion said, his voice flat, dry, and it's clever, very clever, but not clever enough. He explained that Alexander had set up a series of shell companies registered in a constellation of offshore tax havens, the Cayman Islands, Panama, the British Virgin Islands. On the surface, these companies appeared to be legitimate investment vehicles, part of Thorn Global's complex international strategy, but when Orion's team peeled back the layers of legal and financial obfuscation, they found the truth. He has been using these shell companies to siphon money out of Thorn Global, Orion explained. Small amounts at first, a few $100,000 here and there, disguised as consulting or brokerage fees, but the amounts have been increasing exponentially. Over the last 6 months, we're talking tens of millions of pounds, Mrs. Thorne. Victoria's blood ran cold. This was far worse than she had ever imagined. This wasn't just infidelity, this was embezzlement on a grand scale. Where's the money going? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. That's the interesting part, Orion replied. It's being funneled into a single account at a private bank in Liechtenstein. The account is held by a trust, and the sole beneficiary of that trust is a woman named Evelyn Stone. Victoria felt the air leave her lungs. The diamond necklace was a bauble. This was the real prize. He wasn't just having an affair with Evelyn, he was funding her. He was stealing from his own company, his own future, his own son, to build a new life with his mistress. And there's more, Orion continued. One of the shell companies, a holding company called Apex Holdings, was used to purchase a property, a very expensive property, Hessen-Terra file. Victoria opened it to find the deed and architectural prunes for a stunning modernist villa perched on a cliffside in Porto. The villa, still under construction, was a masterpiece of glass and steel with an infinity pool that seemed to melt into the Ligurian Sea. The purchase price was a staggering $25 million, and the registered owner was a Holdings. The brazen audacity, the depth of his deception was breathtaking. He wasn't just planning a weekend getaway. He was building a new life, a new home, a new future, all with stolen money, and he was doing it right under her nose. I need you to document everything, Orion, Victoria said, her voice now hard as steel. Every transaction, every email, every bank transfer. I want a file so thick and irrefutable it will bury him. Consider it done, Mrs. Thorne. We'll have a full dossier ready for you in an hour. After the call ended, Victoria sat in silence for a long time. The architectural blueprints of the Portuano villa glowed on her screen. The beautiful house meant for another woman was a monument to his betrayal, but it was also his greatest vulnerability. It was the loose thread that when pulled unraveled his entire world. She thought of her father, a man of unshakable principle, a man who valued integrity and honor above all else. He was a board member of Thorne Global, a position he had taken to mentor Alexander and guide the young CEO. He had trusted Alexander. He had welcomed him into their family. The discovery of the affair would be a deep personal blow to him, but the discovery of the embezzlement would be an unforgivable sin, a betrayal of everything her father stood for. She knew what she had to do. It was time to bring her father in. Butch had to be careful. She had to present it to him in a way that would force him to act, not just as a wounded father, but as a responsible board member with a fiduciary duty to the company and its shareholders. Do you think Victoria should have confronted Alexander sooner, or was her salon plan more effective? Share your thoughts in the comments. The last phone call. Meanwhile, in Monaco, Alexander Thorne felt invincible. The business meeting with the Swiss bankers had gone exceptionally well. They had agreed in principle to a new line of credit for Thorne Global's European expansion, a deal that would be hailed as a major coup in the financial press. His weekend with Evelyn had been a perfect, intoxicating escape. As he packed his bags to return to London, he felt a renewed sense of vitality. He believed he had successfully compartmentalized his life, that he could have it all. The respectable wife and prestigious family name in London and the passionate, exciting mistress tucked away for his personal pleasure. His phone rang. It was Victoria. He let it ring for a moment, a small, cruel smile on his lips. The bird in the gilded cage calling for its master. He finally answered, his voice a practiced soft mask of affection. Hello, my love. I was just thinking about you. The meetings went better than I could have ever hoped for. I'm on my way to the airport now. I'll be home before you know it. That's wonderful, darling. Victoria's voice came through the phone, as sweet and syrupy as honey. But underneath the sweetness was a new, unusual note, a hint of something cold and sharp. I have a surprise for you when you get back. Something I think you'll find enlightening. A surprise. I love surprises, Alexander said, a slight unease beginning to prickle at the back of his neck. What is it? You'll have to wait and see, Victoria replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. But I'll give you a hint. It involves a woman named Evelyn Stone, a villa in Portuano, and the Thorne Global Board of Directors. The phone went silent. Alexander stood motionless in the middle of his hotel suite, the phone still glued to his ear. The blood drained from his face. Evelyn Portuano, the board of directors. It was impossible. How could she know? How could she know? A wave often cold and nauseating washed over him. He looked around the sweet thermoplastic bed, the empty champagne bottle, the lingering scent of Evelyn's perfume. The walls of his carefully constructed world were beginning to close in on him. The bird was no longer in the gilded cage. She was out and she was coming for him. He frantically tried to call his office, his lawyer, anyone who could tell him what was happening. But it was too late. The storm he never saw coming was about to break, and he was standing directly in its path. The flight back to London was the longest 8 hours of Alexander Thorne's life. The luxurious cabin of his private jet, usually a sanctuary of calm and control, felt like a prison cell hurtling through the sky. He paced the plush carpet like a caged animal, his mind racing, trying to piece together how his carefully constructed world had imploded so spectacularly. Evelyn Portuano, the board of directors. Victoria's words echoed in his ears, a death sentence, fourth life he knew. He had tried to call Evelyn, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He had tried to call his contacts at the Liechtenstein Bank, but they were stonewalling him, citing client confidentiality. Every door he tried to open was being slammed in his face. He was flying blind into a hurricane, and the hurricane's name was Victoria. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as a beautiful, docile creature, a perfect ornament for his life of power and success. He had never imagined the steel that lay beneath the silk, the sharp strategic mind that hid behind her polite social smile. He had made the fatal mistake of mistaking her compliance for weakness. When the jet finally landed at London City Airport, he wasn't met by his usual driver. Instead, a grim-faced man in a dark suit he didn't recognize was waiting on the tarmac. "Mr. Thorne," the man said, his voice flat and impersonal, "I'm here to escort you to an emergency board of directors meeting at Thorne Global headquarters." "A board meeting? No, it's midnight," Alexander protested, his voice laced with a panic he could no longer hide. "The board has been convened, sir. It is not a request." The drive into London was silent and tense. The familiar glittering skyline of the city he had conquered now seemed menacing, its towering buildings like tombstones in a cemetery of his own making. As they approached the Thorne Global Tower, a shimmering monument to his ambition, he saw a crowd of reporters and photographers gathered at the entrance, their cameras flashing like a fusillade of gunfire. The news had broken while Alexander was in the air. Claire Vickers had dropped the bomb. Her podcast, The Vice's Report, had released a special episode, an explosive expose detailing the affair between Alexander Thorne and Evelyn Stone. I had everything. The clandestine trip to Monaco, the name of the hotel, the suite number, the diamond necklace. It was a brutal and meticulous takedown, and I thought spread like wildfire across the internet. By the time Alexander's plane landed, his name was trending on Twitter, and his face was plastered across every gossip, blog and news city on the planet. But the affair was only the first volley. Victoria had saved their ammunition for the board meeting. He was led through a back entrance, bypassing the media circus, and taken directly to the 50th floor boardroom. The room, usually a testament to his power, was now an arena for his execution. The long polished mahogany table was filled with the grim, unyielding faces of the board of directors. At the head of the table, in the chairman's seat, sat Victoria's father, William Sterling. His face, a mask of cold, controlled fury. And next to him, in the seat that was rightly Alexander's, sat Victoria. She wore a simple but elegant black dress, her pregnancy a silent, powerful statement in the room. She looked calm, serene, her eyes clear and steady. The bird in the gilded cage was gone. In her place was a woman as formidable as any industry titan in that room. Alexander William Sterling's voice was like the crack of a whip, cutting through the thick, tense silence. "Thank you for joining us. We have a great deal to discuss." Alexander opened his mouth to speak, to offer some defense, some explanation, but Victoria cut him off. "There is no need for formalities, father." Her voice resonated with an authority that left the room in silence. She stood up and on the large screen behind her, the screen usually reserved for projecting quarterly earnings and market analyses, an image appeared. It was a high-resolution photograph of Alexander and Evelyn kissing on the balcony of their suite in Monaco. A collective gasp went through the room. Alexander felt this last remnants of composure crumble. He was exposed, humiliated, his betrayal laid bare for all to see. "As you can see," Victoria continued, her voice cold and even, "my husband has been otherwise preoccupied. His recent trip to Monaco, which he claimed was for a crucial business meeting, was in fact a romantic tryst with his mistress, a Miss Evelyn Stone." She then proceeded with the calm, methodical precision of a seasoned prosecutor to lay out her case. She presented the photographs and video footage from Robert Mill's team, a damning visual record of the affair. She played a recording of her last phone call with Alexander, the one where he had so easily lied about the success of his business meetings. But she didn't stop there. This wasn't just about infidelity, this was about the future of the company. "My husband's personal indiscretions, while deeply painful to me, are not the main reason we are here tonight," she said, her eyes sweeping over the stunned faces of the board members. "His recklessness extends far beyond his marriage vows. It threatens the very foundation of this company." On the screen behind her, the images of the affair were replaced by a complex web of flowcharts and financial statements. It was the dossier, prepared by Orion and his team. Victoria, with the aid of her corporate counsel, who sat silently in a corner of the room, began to walk the board through Alexander's elaborate embezzlement scheme. She exposed the shell companies, the fraudulent invoices, the siphoning of millions of pounds of company funds. She showed tenth wire transfers to Evelyn Stone's secret Liechtenstein bank account. And then, for the grand finale, she displayed the architectural blueprints of the $25 million villa in Port, a lavish love nest built with stock money. The boardroom was silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning, The board members, titans of finance and industry, men who had seen it all, stared at the screen in disbelief and awe. They were looking at fraud of breathtaking audacity, a betrayal of trust that went to the very core of their corporate ethics. Alexander stood there naked, his loosened deception laid bare in the harsh, unforgiving light of the boardroom. He looked at Victoria, he really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the woman he had married. Not the pretty, pliable Aries, but a queen, a warrior, a woman who had just checkmated him in the most public and brutal way imaginable. William Sterling finally broke the silence. He stood up, his face etched with a deep, terrible sadness, but his voice was firm. In light of this evidence, he said, through it catching in his throat, I have no choice but to call for a vote of no confidence in our CEO, Alexander Thorne. Furthermore, I propose that we immediately launch a full-scale independent forensic audit of the company's financials and turn over all our findings to the relevant authorities, including the Financial Conduct Authority and the Serious Fraud Office. He looked at Alexander, his eyes filled with a mix of pity and contempt. You have disgraced yourself. You have disgraced this company and you have disgraced my family. You are finished. The vote was a mere formality. One by one the board members raised their hands, a forest of condemnation. Alexander Thorne, the golden boy of the London Stock Exchange, the master of the universe, was unanimously and unceremoniously stripped of his title, his power, and his future as security guards walked into the room to escort him out of the building. He looked at Victoria one last time. Her face was impassive, but her eyes, for a fleeting instant, revealed a flicker of the immense pain he had caused her. But there was no triumph in her gaze, no gloating, just a quiet resolve. He had built an empire, but he had forgotten the one rule that governs in the end, they are vulnerable, and his had been brought down not by a corporator or a market crash, but by the one person he thought he had under his total control, his wife. What lesson do you think is the most important from Victoria? Is there anything you would do differently if you were in her shoes? Join the discussion in the comments. The new dynasty, the downfall of Alexander Thorne, was not a gentle decline. It was a seismic event that sent shockwaves from the London Stock Exchange to the highest echelons of global finance. The morning after the boardroom takedown, Thorne Global was a company under siege. The stock, a blue-chip behemoth for a decade, opened in freefall, losing value with every passing minute. On the trading floor, the ticker symbol TG flashed in violent, panicked red, a digital scream of investors fleeing, billions in market capitalization of A into the ether. The life's work of thousands of employees and thousands of investors turned to dust at the whim of one disgraced CEO's libidined greed. Inside the gleaming Thorne Global Tower, the atmosphere was a toxic cocktail of fear and chaos. Employees, who had once walked the halls with the confident swagger of industry leaders, now huddled in silent, anxious groups around coffee machines and in hushed conference rooms, their eyes glued to the news tickers on their computer screens. All the major news networks led with the story. The meticulously curated photographs from Robert Mills's team were everywhere. The image of Alexander and Evelyn on the Monaco balcony, now an iconic symbol of corporate hubris. The name Evelyn Stone was on everyone's lips, a ghost who had helped bring down a giant and then disappeared as quickly as she had appeared. Rumors ran rampant that she had been spotted in Dubai, then in Moscow. The stolen millions from Fenstein account, ensuring she would live a life of luxury far beyond the reach of any extradition treaty. The half-finished villa in Portuano became a tourist attraction for yacht sailing the Italian Riviera, a modern ruin of affluent king. For Alexander, the 24 hours following his ousting from the boardroom were a descent into a personal hell. Holed up in a friend's multi-million-pound loft in Shoreditch, he was a man unraveling. The friend, a hedge fund manager who had made a fortune on Alexander's tips, had offered the refuge out of a sense of past obligation, but his welcome was stern and tinged with a fear of association. Alexander, unshaven and fueled by whiskey and rage, frantically worked the phone, calling in favors from men who had once clamored for his attention. But the calls were not returned. His contacts in banking, politics, and media had become ghosts. He was radioactive. His attempts to move what little money he had left in personal accounts were blocked. Every transaction flagged by financial institutions, now under immense scrutiny. He was trapped. His vast wealth, now a digital mirage he could see but not. His world had shrunk to the four walls of a borrowed apartment. The city once owned, now a hostile territory. The end came as it so often does in the grey light of dawn. The loud, authoritative knock on the door was not a surprise, but it was a brutal and final confirmation of his total ruin. As agents let him out in handcuffs, the flashes of the waiting press were like a final merciless firing squad. The Mon who had graced the cover of Forbes and Fortune, the titan of industry, was no just another pup. His bespoke suit, a wrinkled, pathetic symbol of how far had fallen. For Victoria, the public spectacle of her husband's demise brought no joy, only a deep, weary sadness. She watched the news reports from the seclusion of her father's mansion in the wealthy Kensington neighborhood, having fled the Mayfair penthouse that now felt tainted with ghosts. Every image of Alexander's fall was a fresh reminder of the man she had once loved, the future she had believed in. The victory was absolute, but the cost had been immense. Her private pain had been made public property, a global soap opera for the masses to consume. She was inundated with interview requests, with lucrative book and movie offers. Claire Vickers' podcast had broken all records, making Claire a household name and Victoria a reluctant icon. She was hailed as a hero, a symbol of feminine empowerment, but in the quiet moments when the lawyers and consultants had gone, she felt only the profound ache of betrayal and the overwhelming weight of the future. It was from this state of exhaustion and uncertainty that her father, William Sterling, approached her with the proposition that would redefine her life. He found her in the library, staring out at the rain-soaked streets, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "The board is in agreement," he said, his voice soft. "They want you to step in as interim CEO." Victoria turned, her expression a mix of disbelief and horror. "Absolutely not, Father. That's insane. I'm an art historian. I'm about to have a baby. What do I know about running a multi-billion-dollar global conglomerate?" "You know more than you think," William insisted, sitting beside her. "You have a strategic mind, Victoria. I've seen it your entire life. You saw the rot in Thorn Global before else. You didn't just cry or run away. You gathered intelligence, you built a team, and you executed a flawless plan that decapitated the corruption at its source. That wasn't the act of a spurned wife. That was the act of a leader. But I don't want that life. I don't want to be in the spotlight. I want to build a nursery and raise my son in peace." "And you will," he said, taking her hand. "But think of the legacy you will build for him. Do you want his company, his inheritance, to be managed by a committee of strangers, forever stained by this scandal? Or do you want it to be led by his mother, the woman who saved it? You are the only person who can restore integrity to that name, Victoria, the only one who can signal a true and clean break from the past. The world sees you as a victim. This is your chance to show them who you really are. A survivor, a builder, the woman who took back her power." His words struck a chord deep. Within her he was right. Hiding would mean letting Alexander's actions define the companion, by extension, her son's legacy forever. Stepping up, as terrifying as it was the only way to truly reclaim the narrative, to build something new and clean from the wreckage. With a deep breath that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, Victoria Sterling nodded. "All right, Father, I'll do it." Her first day as interim CEO was a baptism by fire. The moment she stepped out of her car in front of the Thorn Global Tower, she was mobbed by a frantic pack of reporters shouting questions. She walked through them with a quiet, regal grace, her facial mask of serene determination, offering only a polite but firm no comment. Her first act was not to lock herself in the executive suite on the 50th floor, but to call a company-down hall meeting in the building's stunning glass atrium. Standing on a simple stage, she looked out at that of employees, their faces a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. She wasn't the CEO they were used to. She was a woman, she was pregnant. Anesh was the wife of the man who had led them to the brink of disaster. "I know what you're all thinking," she began, her voice clear and amplified by the microphone, but retaining an intimate or personal quality. "You're looking at me and you're wondering what a sterling eyes, an art historian, can possibly do to fix this mess. The truth is, I can't fix it alone. This company is not a Boutoni person. It was never meant to be." She laid out the raw truth of this scandal, her voice devoid of self-pity, but filled with a palpable anger at their betrayal of trust. Then she pivoted, laying out a vision for a new Thorn Global, one built on transparency, accountability, and a return to core values. She announced the immediate sale of the corporate jet and executive car fleet. She channeled the luxurious multi-million-pound leadership retreat that Alexander had planned in the Swiss Alps. "The era of obscene excess at Thorn Global is over," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "Our new currency will be trust. Our new status symbol will be integrity." The speech was met with a moment of stunned silence, then a murmur of applause that grew into a deafening ovation. It was a masterpiece, a perfect blend of humility and strength that won the hearts and minds of her most important asset, her people. In the weeks that followed, Victoria proved her words were not mere rhetoric. She was a whirlwind of focused energy, working 18-hour days with a disciplined effort, impressed even the most hardened veterans on the board. She tore down the opaque corporate structure Alexander had built, replacing it with a more streamlined, collaborative model, promoting talented executives from within the company, many of whom had been overlooked by Alexander's boy club culture. She proved to be a shrewd, decisive leader. Her outsider's perspective allowed her to see problems and solutions that the entrenched old guard had overlooked. 2 months into her tenure, 3 months before her due date, she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. In the quiet, sterile peace of the hospital room, away from the chaos of boardrooms and balance sheets, she held him in her arms and she cried. They were tears of joy, of relief, and of a deep bone-weary exhaustion. She named him Arthur William Sterling. He would bear her last name, the name of her family, who valued honor above all else, and the name of the grandfather who had believed in her when she could not believe in herself. Holding her son, looking at his small sleeping face, Victoria felt the last vestiges of the victim fade away. The pain of Alexander's betrayal was a scar she would carry forever, a permanent part of her story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. She had looked into the abyss of a shattered life and refused to fall. Instead, she had built a bridge across it. She was no longer a bird in a gilded cage, nor was she just a woman who had brought down a king. She was a queen in her own right, the architect of a new dynasty, forged not by privilege, but by pain, resilience, and an unshakable will. Her great work of art was not a painting on a wall, but the future she was now building for herself, for her company, and for her son. This story isn't just about regret or second chances, it's about transformation. It's about a man who once chose fear over love, control over vulnerability, and still found the courage to come back and become the person he was always meant to be. The ending is not a fairy tale, it's an honestly happy one, not because all the problems disappeared, but because the characters finally chose truth over pretense, presence over pride. The birth of their daughter isn't a reward, it's a symbol. Sometimes, life gives you a miracle not to fix what was broken, but to remind you, better building from the ruins, humble brick by humble brick, is still possible. This isn't a story about a man who won, it's about a man who stayed, who faced with broke, who showed up when it mattered, and who became a father, a partner, and most of all, someone with a real rapport.